We're gonna record this, and it'll be available on our YouTube web site in about a week. But I wanted to say hello and welcome to this third and final installment of our Salmon Recovery series in partnership with Trout Unlimited, Cascade Fisheries, and Cascadia Conservation District. I'm Ash Kuntz, and I'm the STEM Services Manager at NCW Libraries. And our mission is to connect people to vital resources and opportunities that foster individual growth and strengthen communities. And this is a great opportunity to learn about some of the local recovery and conservation efforts in our area. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that all of the participants in our programs are required to abide by our code of conduct. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to submit your questions at any point in time through the Q&A feature, and then reserve the chat function for any technical issues. Tonight is titled Beaver Powered Restoration, and it's my pleasure to introduce Kodi Jo Jaspers. She is the Beaver and BDA Program Manager for Trout Unlimited. Is an experienced wildlife biologist with over 9 years working in the natural resources field. So welcome, Kodi.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ash. I just want to start out tonight by thanking all of the partners that have made this webinar series so great over the last couple months, specifically the library and Ash and her team. This has been so great to work with all of you and partner with you on this webinar series. And then also our other partners, Cascade Fisheries and Cascadia Conservation District, for those of you who've joined us over the previous months with Jason and Patrick's presentations. I feel like Beaver Powered Restoration is the perfect culmination for this series because we're talking about an animal that is both aquatic and helps our salmon, and an animal that also is on land and can impact our forests as well. So it's kind of this great culmination, I think, for our series. So thanks for having me. And should I just jump in? Cool. All right. So first and foremost, I wanted to start with, if I can change the screen. It's International Beaver Day. Woo! This was totally a happy coincidence. I woke up this morning and realized that today was International Beaver Day. It is every year on April 7th, but kind of fun that today we are doing a Beaver Powered Restoration webinar on International Beaver Day. So I just thought I'd share that with everybody.
See the YouTube screen. Not if you have a PowerPoint gone.
I do. That's odd. I wonder why it changed.
There you go.
Good now?
Yeah.
Weird. So I just thought I'd start off with a little bit about Trout Unlimited. I am the Beaver Powered Restoration Program Manager for Trout Unlimited. I've been with Trout Unlimited for about 2 years. But Trout Unlimited is a national nonprofit. We work throughout the United States to preserve native trout and their habitats. And we've been working in the Wenatchee Valley since about 2005. And a lot of our projects in the past have really focused on irrigation infrastructure and fish passage and working with the community members to do plantings and other things like that. But in 2018, we started to look at the potential of partnering with one of our very charismatic wildlife species in the valley to help us preserve fish and their habitats. And that's where the Beaver projects came in. So just to dig into beavers, I just thought we'd start with some of the biology about beavers to ground us. So beavers are the largest rodent in North America. They can weigh anywhere between 25 and 65 pounds, but I was talking to a trapper the other day, and in the 80s, he caught a 71-pound beaver. So they can get quite a bit larger. The largest one we've ever handled with the project was 51 pounds. As I mentioned before, they are semi-aquatic. So they do spend time in the water, but they also spend time on land. And I've heard them called the milk duds of the forest because they aren't the most agile things on land. And they are really fatty and they smell good. And so they're actually a really important prey species for a lot of our predators out there, like cougars and bears. They live about 15 years and they are herbivorous, which there is a myth that they eat fish, and they do not. They don't eat fish, and some of their favorite foods are things like aspen, cottonwood, those deciduous trees, but they also will eat herbaceous, like aquatic plants like lilies as well. And so they are also an incredibly social animal. And so they live in family units and they are breeding pairs that mate for life. So they're monogamous and they have anywhere from 2 to 5 kits every year. And what's interesting is those kits will actually stay with the family unit for 2 years. So they don't disperse from the family until they're 2 years old. And that's when they go off to find their own habitat and build their own family unit. And some of the really interesting beaver adaptations that are fun. Beavers groom a lot. If you ever see our beavers up at the hatchery, they are constantly, we give them somewhere to groom because they're always grooming. And the reason they do that is because they use their oils to help waterproof their fur. And they actually have on their back feet, they have these split toenails, which you can see in that photo. And the reason for that is they actually use that to help take that oil through their fur and help waterproof their fur, which is really interesting. Another one of their adaptations, which they are very well known for, are their big flat tails. They're scaly, really leathery feeling. They use these tails for all different things. For example, using it as a propeller to maneuver and guide themselves through the water. When they're carrying a stick on ground, you'll see them carrying sticks in their front lip with their front hands like this, and they'll use that tail kind of as a prop. They'll also use it as a prop when they are chewing trees down. One of the really important things they use their tail for is as a predator deterrent. So if you were to startle a beaver, or if a bear or a cougar came up on a beaver and startle it, and they wanted to deter that predator, they actually slap their tail on the water, and it kind of startles the predator and gives the beaver a chance to swim away. And they'll also use that tactic when they're trying to get a predator away from the kits that may be in the lodge. And so we actually had a beaver last year. Her name was Rosie the Riveter. We were releasing her up off the White River. She was a very feisty beaver. This kind of gives you a great example of what that tail slap looks like. So she said, nope, you're too close to me. I don't want you that close. And you can see how quickly she maneuvered away from us after she did that tail slap. So that's a really important use for that tail. Underwater adaptations. So they are incredibly agile in water. When we try to catch our beavers at the hatchery, they're really hard to catch because they are so good at what they do underwater. And the reason for that, they have a lot of different adaptations. So they have those back feet that are webbed that help them swim. Those front feet actually have little like fingers on them so that they can grab things and help maneuver through the water. They also have double eyelids, like a lot of wildlife species do, so they can keep the main eyelid open when they're swimming and close that second eyelid so that they can see while they're swimming. And then they also have 2 sets of lips. So you can see this beaver is carrying that branch, and his lips are open, his furthest out lips are open, and his teeth are on that branch, but he also has a second set of lips that close behind those teeth so that he's not taking in water as he's swimming. Beavers can hold their breath anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. And so it makes them really great at building dams and doing all the things that beavers do. Another thing beavers are well known for is their ability to chew trees. And the way they do that is with their teeth, and their teeth are orange, and they're orange because they are made out of iron. And so their teeth actually never stop growing. They continually grow. And the reason for that is because they always need something sharp to chew trees. It's an incredibly hard substance that they are chewing. And so their teeth continually grow. And as they chew, that chewing sharpens their teeth. And so this is an incredibly important adaptation for their daily life. Beavers are also known as ecosystem engineers, and this term has come about in the last few years because of their ability to basically engineer their habitat. There is no other wildlife species out there that can completely change the ecosystem around where they live, like a beaver. And how they do that is by doing what they do naturally, building dams, building their lodges, building canals. And so all of these things provide really important habitat for wildlife species, fish species. They help us. They help us with climate change, and we'll dig into all those benefits. But all of these things that beavers do in the ecosystem have created this name for beavers, and you'll often hear them called ecosystem engineers because of these big feats that they have. And so you can see in these photos, this lodge here, it's massive. It's taller than an average sized person, average sized technician out in the field. The dam had been breached and the water had been drained. So, that would be, I would say probably a quarter of that, if not half of it, would have historically been covered in water. But you can just see the massive engineering feat of creating that lodge. A lot of our beavers in the valley will also build bank burrows. So they'll dig into the side of the bank, usually on some of our bigger like rivers, like the Wenatchee or the Columbia, and they won't necessarily build these stick lodges. And then this dam up here is a great example of just your standard beaver dam on a high water stream. And then the canals that they build are really interesting. If you look at a beaver complex, there's a lot of different meandering parts of the stream. So they build canals out from their ponds and from the stream, and that allows them to reach food and building material with cover so that they're not as exposed to predators. So those canals are really important too for reconnecting floodplains and bringing nutrients into the system. So that's the basic biology of the beaver, but we also need to talk about the history of the beaver because that plays an important role into why we're here today talking about them. I think that this quote really sums up beavers and the history of beavers. No animal has figured more prominently in the affairs of any nation than has that of the beaver in the early history of the New World. Fur trapping is all I have to say, really. In Washington State and the West in general, the fur trade was a big part of people moving out west, and beavers were the primary thing being trapped. And that was because there was a huge drive for them for beaver felt hats in Europe. And so a lot of people came out here, and beavers were a big drive of why folks came out here and moved. And you can see in this photo, we had several trading posts just in Washington alone. And the Columbia River really drove that. And so there was a lot of pressure on the beaver in the early 1800s. And they suspect prior to the settlers coming out west, they suspect that the beaver population in North America was between 60 and 400 million. And by 1900, they believe that had dropped down to 100,000 beaver. And that is based primarily off of trapping records and how many beavers had been caught. It has rebounded, and the population numbers in about 2000 ranged between 9 and 50 million. And you say, wow, those are really big ranges. And the reason for that is because there's never been a really hard and fast population analysis done. And so it's definitely a need that we have to better understand beaver population, but we know that we haven't hit those pre-contact numbers yet. So once we hit kind of like the late 1800s and the 1900s, you know, Washington state became a state, and then we started game wardens and we started getting game laws and trapping was restricted. People started to really understand the loss of beaver. And so relocation became something. And it was 1920, I believe, that the first relocation effort was completed in Washington state. They did it by horseback. This picture here on the right actually is a beaver relocation effort that occurred in Mission Creek right here in the valley. So the soil conservation went up Mission Creek in 1935, and they saw a couple beavers, but they saw where there was a bunch of habitat that was no longer being inhabited. And so they caught, they called them vagrant beaver down in the Wenatchee River, 12 of them, and they relocated them to Mission Creek, and they came back in 1937, so 2 years later, and within 5 miles of stream, the beavers had built over 60 dams. And so even in the 1930s, relocation and beaver, it was something that people were thinking about and already understanding the importance that these animals had on the landscape. So my next slide is just a really fun video. If you haven't seen this before, let's see, I have to switch over to this though to share it. So give me a second. And Ash, tell me if the sound doesn't work.
That lake are crates full of beavers, part of a shipment to be dropped in the primitive area by parachute from an airplane. A conservation officer runs suspension ropes through the beaver drop box. In preparing for the operation, beaver must be sorted for even size and weight, with one pair of beaver for each box. Ear tags are attached for future information. Into the drop box, nearly ready for that flight back into the mountains. The drop crates are loaded into the airplane. Parachutes are attached to cargo lines, and the boxes are stacked in rows along the waist of the plane. 10 boxes to a load, 20 beaver ready for the flight to mountain meadows. The plane makes a careful approach, ready for the drop. Now into the air and down they swing, down to the ground near a stream or a lake. The box opens, and a most unusual and novel trip ends for Mr. Beaver. He's on his way now. His nose and his instinct tell him where to find the water. There's room here for a new home.
So I just love that video because I think it's a great portrayal of what people have done in the past. That was the Idaho Fish and Game in 1950. They, saw the need for beavers higher in the watershed and decided that the easiest way to get them there was parachuting them out of an airplane. While people don't do that anymore, I think it's just a fun look at where beavers have been. Let's see if I can go back to the presentation. So King County has a beaver working group, and they built this timeline, which I think is a really great summary of kind of where beavers have gone over the history in Washington state. And so you can kind of see those 1800s, the commercial trade began. By the mid 1800s, large scale logging was established. And if you were here for Jason's presentation, a lot of the salmon stuff was really linked to that occurring as well. Washington became a state in 1889. That first relocation in 1920, which I believe was in Walla Walla in Washington state. and it wasn't until 2012 and 2017 that we actually had regulations around beaver relocation and how we do it to make sure that we're doing it correctly and doing it right. So just thought that was a great summary. So if we think about that massive loss of beavers, going from 60 million down to 100,000, and we think about the fact that, over 50% of our water courses in the US and Canada are headwater streams, meaning that they are beaver habitat or could be beaver habitat, where they could have been potentially inhabited in the 1800s before the fur trade. And we think about the benefits that beavers have on the landscape, which we'll dig into here in a little bit, but they have all of these benefits. So if we think about those two things in comparison, you could theoretically say that the loss of beaver is one of the most profound causes of habitat alteration in headwater streams. I know I'm going out on a limb saying that, but there is the potential, and it's where we're going with beaver powered restoration and thinking about that. And to kind of put that into a picture in your mind, this is sagebrush country, a little bit different than our upper Wenatchee Valley, but it depicts a great visual of what some of our streams look like now due to alteration. And that alteration could be anything from just taking large wood out of the stream because it doesn't look pretty, or cattle grazing, or building roads up along a stream. It's making these streams and water courses basically too efficient. They're draining too quickly. They're less messy. They lack that complexity that is beneficial for everything on the landscape. And so removing beaver from the landscape has created some of these things as well. And so how do beavers restore the habitat? What are all these benefits that Kodi keeps talking about? Well, I'm going to walk you through kind of the cycle of how beavers restore our landscape. So if we start with an incised stream, you can see that that stream is feet below the original valley bottom and the floodplain. And that is causing a lot of issues, lacking some riparian habitat and different things for the landscape there. But beavers have come in and they have decided to build dams in this incised stream. And so what those dams are doing is they're ponding water. They're also collecting really important sediment and helping our fish species with that. But that sediment is also really rich in nutrients. And so when beaver dams blow out, like they inevitably do, because that's what they do, that stream bottom, as you can see, has widened. And so with that blowout, the stream starts to meander a little bit. It starts to take back some of that valley bottom, even though it's still at a lower place. It's giving space for riparian habitat to come back, because all of that sediment that's been collected behind those beaver dams is great and prime places for riparian habitat to come back. Then the beavers come back like they always do, and they build bigger, more stable dams, wider across that larger valley bottom. Those dams are able to hold more water, more sediment, and it starts to slowly erode that stream channel. Again, they blow out, more riparian habitat comes in, you get more more multiple channels, as you can see in this graphic. And that process just continues until you eventually get enough sediment built up that you can completely reconnect the floodplain. And that cycle just goes on and on and on. And it's not overnight that this happens. It takes years, but it eventually comes back to this complex habitat that when you look at, beaver nirvana, these beautiful places, these beautiful beaver complexes, this is what they look like. They're messy. And I use messy in a very good term. There's a lot of complexity in here and biodiversity. And so if we think about these complex habitats, what are those specific benefits that we're trying to achieve here in the valley? And one of them, and probably one of the largest, is storing water. And this is a beaver pond, an older beaver pond up off of the Chihuahua River. And we've all experienced, the hot summers here in this valley, especially last summer with those record high heats. storing water later into our dry summers is becoming incredibly important. Even every day, every summer that we live here, it's more and more important. It's more important for our fish species that we have cool water later into the summer. It's important for our irrigation and our agricultural industries here in the valley. And it's important for us too. Water is an important thing in this valley. So beavers also create, like I said, those complex stream habitats. So if you think about that graphic with all of those multiple channels and all of the downed wood and the different riparian species, this complexity provides a vital habitat for various fish species, but also just about every wildlife species uses riparian habitat at least some point in their life history. And so it's really important habitat to have that complexity that beaver complexes provide. They also recruit wood. And so historically, a lot of big wood was removed from the stream because it didn't look good or what have you. And a lot of big projects are happening with putting large wood back into the streams. And you'll see those throughout the valley. And those are really important projects. But beavers do it naturally. That's their job. That's what they do day in and day out. And you can see just from a basic dam here, you know, all of the recruitment of the wood that this beaver has provided. They're also falling trees that can eventually potentially end up in the creeks as well. And so they're recruiting that really important wood back into the creek that provides cover for fish species and nutrients as well. They also can mitigate floods. And so this is an old beaver complex up off of Icicle Creek. And the water has drained out of it in this photo. But the point being is that if a flood were to come through here, that complex habitat and those dams can slow those floods down so they're not as destructive downstream. If you think back to those photos where we have a bowling alley stream, a flood is going to be much more destructive than one that has to meet a beaver complex before it gets to us. And so as our climate changes and we get more fires, floods are also a part of those big fires. And so it's something to keep in mind as we think about how beavers shape our landscape. Also reduce the incision and promote floodplain interaction. And that's kind of what those graphics were showing. This is a drone footage or photo from our BDA project last summer over in Douglas County. And we are trying to reduce some of the incision. And so you can see incision kind of on the right and left edges of that creek. But the other thing we're trying to do is back up that water, back up into that floodplain. You can see that it's kind of wet still, but it was likely inundated with water at one point. And so really trying to reconnect that floodplain and provide that important water source for those riparian plants. So that's one. And then it also is just really good at enhancing biodiversity. So like I mentioned, just about every wildlife species will use riparian habitat at some point in their life history. And so these are just some photos that we've gotten over the years at our beaver sites. And so we have mallard with her chicks in the spring. We have a cougar using the riparian habitat as a travel corridor. And this was one of our BDA sites. And we'll talk about BDAs in a little bit. We have a river otter in a beaver pond. Beaver ponds are also really important for bears, and they are predator and prey, so that is one important thing. But also in these hot summers, they will go and cool off in these beaver ponds. So you can see this is from last year during that heat wave that we got. Photo was taken at 91 degrees, it says. But the bear is just hanging out in the beaver pond. And what's really cool is this bear is actually collared. So the WDFW collared the sow a few years ago, and they've been tracking her and her reproductive success. And so it's really neat to see these projects overlap as well. Bobcats. So we get a lot of bobcats in our beaver habitat. And then birds, so many birds, just about every bird on the landscape will use riparian habitat. This is a great blue heron, looks like he's out fishing in the beaver pond. And I know this is all birds and wildlife, but I think it goes without saying the fish species and all the benefits and biodiversity that beaver ponds provide for our fish species, whether it's through macroinvertebrates and food sources or cover. Biggest things that's really come out in research for beavers recently has been their ability to provide climate resiliency. And so we, again, living here in this valley, are all accustomed to wildfires in the summertime, and they've become more frequent, they've become larger, they've become more destructive. And research is showing us that having beaver habitat on the landscape can actually provide some resiliency against these impacts. And so how this happens, and this photo is a great visual of that. Beaver habitat is wet. It's just naturally holds water. And so when fires come through, they can potentially act as a fire break, so slowing down the wildfire, but they definitely act as a green refugia for wildlife and fish. And so it's someplace that these species can escape the wildfire until it passes. And this is huge, not only for our wildlife, but also for us. If we have more beavers on the landscape, it could potentially help our communities that live in those wild urban interfaces and that have wildfire around them every year. I have another video to showcase this, so let me switch over really fast. So Emily Fairfax Dr. Emily Fairfax is one of the researchers doing this work, and she made this stop motion that I think is a really great portrayal of how beavers create resiliency against wildfires. Okay, I think we're back. Cool. Yeah, so climate resiliency has become a really big thing in beaver research, and people are using aerial photographs post-fire to actually track how beavers can provide that refugia on landscape and how they survive, I guess, after wildfires. And we've seen this showcased in Oregon. We've seen it up in the Met Howe and Colorado, especially. And so it's really exciting to be able to think about beavers naturally doing what we're trying to do on the landscape. So with that, kind of wraps up beaver biology, the history of beavers and their benefits. And now I kind of want to move into how we're harnessing these charismatic creatures on the landscape for beaver powered restoration in the Wenatchee Valley. And so I'm happy to take questions now if there's any specific questions about beaver biology, or I can continue on and we can trudge forward.
We haven't gotten any questions yet, but feel free to add questions whenever they come up into that Q&A.
Cool.
I have a, yeah. If you can just throw any questions that you have into the Q&A feature or the chat feature, we can actually see both of those pretty easily. See a hand up.
See a hand up. Cool. Well, I'll just trudge on. If people have questions, yeah, throw them up. I'm happy to stop whenever. So So yeah, the Wenatchee Indiana Beaver Project is the name of our beaver project here. And it's a partnership through Trout Unlimited and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And it was started in 2018. So we are about ready to start our 5th season. It's a really great, exciting project. And the goals of our project, I like to think of them kind of as 3-pronged. So establish beavers in the Wenatchee Basin tributaries and hopefully expanding that into Iniak soon. Construct beaver dam analogs, provide landowner assistance and community engagement, all for habitat enhancement, flow augmentation and storage, and amelioration of climate-related impacts. And you might be wondering why the Wenatchee Valley. And I will start this slide off by saying that our project does work both in Chelan and Douglas counties. Those are kind of the areas that we work both with doing our beaver relocation, but also our in-stream work. But the project was specifically started in the Wenatchee River Basin. And the reason for that is the fact that it's large and over 80% of it is public land. So we have an opportunity to really make an impact. We also have an incredibly diverse landscape. We go from sagebrush country all the way up to, the crest of the Cascades. We also have 3 ESA, endangered species of fish in this valley: steelhead, bull trout, and spring chinook. So that provides an opportunity to really impact some important fish species with beaver powered restoration. We also have water is really important in this valley, like I mentioned, and habitat. But I think one of the really unique pieces about the Wenatchee Valley and the Wenatchee River Basin is the fact that we have such an active conservation community, and folks who live here really care about where they live and want to be involved and have been really supportive of a project like this. And I think that's what has made this project so successful, because it wouldn't be without the community engagement. So I just want to walk through the different kind of arms of our project. And Beaver Coexistence is first and foremost what we do. And so if we are contacted by a private landowner, and if you happen to be a private landowner who has beaver on your property and have questions, please reach out, because we come out and do assessments for free. We just come out and chat with folks and see what's going on their property and figure out the best solution. And the first thing we do is we always try to install some form of mitigation measure so that beavers can stay on the landscape, because if they can stay on the landscape where they can continue to have all those benefits, that's the best of both worlds. It's the best for the beavers and it's the best for us too. And so that can look like caging the trees with wire. It can look like installing what are called Beaver Deceivers through the dam or around culverts. But a big part of that is just education, just getting out there and having conversations with folks and trying to talk about the importance of beavers and why we want to keep them where they are. If you do have beavers on your land, on your property, I just thought I'd throw up some of these quick tips about installing these. Again, feel free to reach out. We're happy to help. But one of the biggest tips I can give you about putting wire around your trees is to give the tree at least a 6-inch gap. You can see we gave it more than that, but historically, people wrapped them too tightly, and then it suffocated that tree, and the bark ended up growing around the cage. And so we don't want that to happen. Give the trees a gap. We also use sturdier wire. A lot of people use chicken wire, and we found that this 2 by 4-inch wire mesh is the best. And then the other thing to really keep in mind is how tall you go. If you don't get a lot of snow, 4 feet tall is pretty good. But if you're up in Plain and you get a ton of snow, then you probably need to make it a little taller, because they are active in the wintertime as well. And so just keeping that in mind, if it's something that you need to do on your property, those are my 3 quick tips. The other thing that we do is Beaver Deceivers. And so if there's a beaver dam on a property that's flooding out some infrastructure, we can actually install a pipe through the dam to help control those water levels and keep them at the level that is safe for everybody and safe for the beavers too. And so we, again, help landowners put these in. We help them through the permitting process. We provide the labor. And so it's a great community service that we provide for Chelan and Douglas counties. But sometimes those coexistence measures either don't work or they aren't the right thing for the situation. And that's when we will come in and non-lethally trap the beavers. And so primarily we use what are called Hancock traps or suitcase traps, like you can see in that upper right-hand photo. So the beavers, we set these traps out overnight because beavers are nocturnal. They primarily move around at night. And once we trap the beavers, they get moved to the Leavenworth Fish Hatchery. And so that lower photo is a photo in an old retired fish raceway at the Leavenworth National Fish Hatchery. They have graciously provided that to us and are such an important partner for this project. We definitely couldn't do this project without the fish hatchery. But our beavers kind of stay at this, beaver hotel, if you will, for a little bit of time, no longer than 2 weeks. We're making sure that they're healthy. We're making sure there's no disease concerns, but also primarily what we're trying to do is trap the entire family unit because they are so social. They do better when we relocate them as a family unit or as much of the family unit as we can. We find that when we release individuals, they don't seem to stick as well. And so they'll hang out here at the hatchery until we can trap as many of that family as we can. And then we release them. And we do a lot of work behind the scenes, going out onto private and public lands, doing habitat assessments to find places that could be suitable for beavers. And when we look at suitable things for beavers, we're looking at the forage and the food availability. We're looking at the amount of water. Do we have water all year long? One of the big things we're looking at is there at least a 3-foot deep pool? Because that is their protection from predators. If there's not a deep pool, there's a likelihood that beaver will probably get predated in a new landscape when it doesn't have any of its regular defenses. And so we do these assessments, and then most of our beavers get put onto Forest Service lands in the Upper Basin. We have released beavers onto private land. So if you have a property that you think beavers should be back on, please let us know because we'd love to work with you. But most of it does occur on Forest Service lands. And we've started using GoPros on our releases. And so I just thought I'd share this fun video of a beaver release. This is from 2020. You can kind of see how beavers maneuver through water, how they use their tails, kind of get a sense of what the underwater part of a release area might look like. So one of the other really important parts of our work and something that we're really passionate about is the community engagement. And like I said before, this project wouldn't be successful without the community support that we get. Not only just the landowners that we have support from, but we also have a really great partnership with the sportsmen and women in the community, like the Wenatchee Valley fly fishers, who volunteer on a lot of our projects and help us. We also love getting kids and students involved with the project because it's such a great, beavers are so charismatic, and I feel like they're such a great poster child for salmon recovery and stream restoration. And kids love to feed them. So if you're ever at the hatchery when we have beavers there and we're feeding, we're happy to let you help us feed as well. And so really trying to provide that education in the community and get community involved in restoration when usually you can't get as super and hands-on as involved. A third kind of leg of the project is our stream restoration. And we do this through beaver dam analogs. They also call them low-tech process-based restoration. And basically what they are is just man-made beaver structures that mimic beaver dams and kind of kickstart that stream restoration. And so the reason that this is becoming something that's being used more often is because it's very simple. All it takes is a post pounder, a couple of posts and your hands, and you can have some BDAs put in a day. It's cost effective because you're not using big equipment, and because you're not using big equipment, you're not being as intrusive to those streams. And so you're not having as big of a negative impact for the benefit. And so it's becoming a really important and big thing in our valley. And we're working with Cascade Fishery and Cascadia Conservation District to really start to implement these at the landscape level and make a big change with these simple and cost-effective restoration approaches. But also, for the sake of our project, it increases the probability of success for our beaver translocation. And so if we can pond water and get those 3-foot deep pools to help our beaver survive, that's even better. And so a lot of these, the end goal is to either have beavers come back naturally or to bring beavers back in through our project. And so we've today installed 50 BDAs between Chelan and Douglas counties. And this is just a video kind of showing how they're built. And so the posts are about 3 inches wide and 6 feet long. You try to pound them into the ground about 3 feet, about 50%. And then you come in with native vegetation and you basically just weave them, like wicker weave them. And you're trying to act like a beaver. We are nowhere near as good as a beaver by any means, but it at least helps kickstart, and the water will still pond and it will still capture that sediment so that we can start to grade some of that incision that you can see that this stream has. So like I said, in 2022, so in May of this year, we will be starting our 5th season. 21 was our 4th season. These are just some of the accomplishments that we have had in the last year. So we do a lot of surveying of the landscape, looking for potential beaver release sites. We work with a lot of landowners. We trapped at 6 sites last year, and we caught 16 beavers. And 16 beavers was the most beavers we've caught in one individual season. We've caught 42 beavers over the last 4 years. One thing that I'm really proud about for the last season that we had no mortalities, and wildlife work, there's always a chance of mortality. And in 2021, we didn't have one for the first time of the project. And so that's really exciting. And I hope that that continues on. We relocated to 6 different sites. And so on the map, those are the green sites that we released to. And of those 6 sites, 4 of them were still being occupied by released beavers in the fall of 21. And so that's like a 66% success rate, which is really exciting to see. We installed 24 BDAs over on Rock Island Creek in Douglas County. And then we engaged with over 1,500 community members, which again is something we really hope to increase and continue to do more of. And some of the accomplishments and some of the fun things that I like to share. In 21, we actually partnered with a WSU grad student who is looking at beavers and their movements after relocation. So that's one of the hardest things for these beaver projects is people ask what happens to the beaver after you release them. And most of the time we don't know. We do put little pit tags in them like the fish get. And so sometimes we know when they move, but most of the times we don't know. And so this grad student actually came out and put VHF transmitters on the beaver tail, like you can see in that photo. And there were 3 beavers released up to Snowy Creek. And you can see on the map, they were released kind of at that star, that gray and red star. And they stayed pretty close to the release site. I would say they probably moved within a mile up and downstream. And they actually ended up building 3 dams. So this is what Snowy Creek looked like before. And then this was just downstream of that first picture. This dam is just over 3 feet tall and over 18 feet wide. And they built that dam in 2 months, and there were 2 more dams below it. And so this is just a great example of what 3 beavers can do in a very short amount of time. And we're very eager to get back in their spring and get back in there to see if they're still around. Some of the BDA projects that we've done, one of our first big ones was up the Iniat on Potato Creek. And this is just a fun example of what, the BDAs were put in September, and the water level obviously is the low part of the season, but it was about just over an inch. And the further up the stream, it was pretty aggraded. And then we came back in March, and you can see how much water is being ponded behind that BDA. And we saw sediment deposits behind those BDAs ranging from 2 to 17 inches. And so a lot of the stream, some of it had aggraded back up to the valley bottom at those ones that were at 17, 18 inches. And so it's really exciting to see the successes coming through, and we're excited to increase these throughout the valley. And that really kind of brings me to the end. And I just wanted to end with how can you get involved if you guys are curious in getting involved? First, I just say spread the word about our beaver services. That's the kind of our bread and butter, is talking to folks and getting out there and having these conversations and helping people with issues that they're having. You can also help volunteer. You can help us build BDAs. You can help us do habitat assessments. You can help feed the beavers, like the photos. We also have landowners that have aspens and cottonwoods on their property that they no longer want. And so we'll actually come cut those down for them and feed them to our beavers, because we need food sources for our beavers as well. And then lastly, if you have a stream on your property that maybe needs some restoration or needs some beavers back, we're always happy to come out and take a look at that as well. So that's the end of my presentation. And I just thank you so much, everyone, for sitting through and listening to all the beaver stuff.
Oh, thank you so much, Kodi. We have some questions coming in. And then one of the things that I was going to ask, do you have a contact for how people can get involved or reach you about volunteer opportunities?
I'll just put my email in the chat.
Yeah.
Is that a good place?
Yeah, and I can also do a follow-up email to everyone as well with your info,
Okay.
if that's easier as well.
Oh, I can throw it in here right now.
Okay. So one of the questions we got is that you had mentioned that beaver habitat is in the Cascades. So do they ever climb into some of the mountains, or do they typically stay in the valley?
Yeah, I mean, that Snowy Creek is our highest elevation beaver, and I actually don't know the elevation of that, but that's really close to, Snoqualmie Pass, and they set up shop up there. They're always going to be down in the stream valleys because they are aquatic species and they rely on that water for their life history. But they do, I've seen them go a long ways away from the river to get food sources and building material. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if we've ever had one cross the Cascade Crest. I don't know about that, but yeah, they move, but they stay primarily close to those riparian areas.
And then how inbred is our beaver population because it was so severely reduced and hunted early on?
Ooh, that's a really great question. I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that, because you'd have to do some real genetic testing, and that really hasn't been done. I think for such a long time, beavers were viewed as just a nuisance species, and so the research is really lacking on understanding some of those things.
Yeah, it's probably, there's not a lot of historical data on it either.
Oh,
So is the Eagle Creek BDA that was completed in the fall of 2021 suitable for beaver release? And thank you for your team's hard work.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure the Eagle Creek BDA project that was done by Chelan County. And so I would have to chat with those folks and see. Eagle Creek has historically had beavers, and if this is the Carl that I know, he knows that too. And so, yeah, we've looked at Eagle Creek as a potential release site, and we'll have to follow up with Chelan County to get out there and take a look at it.
And then can fish tag readers detect the beaver tags?
Yeah, so I kind of brushed that really quickly, but pit tags are these tiny little readers that all of the hatchery fish get put in them. And so there are, as you can imagine, with all of our fish research in the valley, hundreds of these arrays in our streams all over. And so when we put those little pit tags in the beavers, if they cross one of those arrays, it will pick up the beaver movement. And it, it's hard because beavers can also go on land, right? And so if they go around it, we don't always get them. And I don't necessarily know the life expectancy for them in a beaver versus a fish. But we do get hits. And so it does work. I just actually, a fun story that Rosie the Riveter, the beaver that did the tail slap, she was an individual release. We caught her on camera on September 9th. And within 9 days, she went from like 9 miles up the White River, all the way down through Lake Wenatchee, and then started up the Chihuahua River. And that's where she was read on the Chihuahua River pit array. So that's like 24 miles that she traveled in 9 days. So it does happen, not very frequently. I think only out of 42 beavers, we've only ever got 6 readings. But yeah. Okay,
that's cool though. This is a little off topic, but what kind of fish is on your wall?
I don't actually know. That was artwork that I found in one of the shops in downtown Wenatchee, and I'm not a fish person, guys. I work for Trout Unlimited. I should know.
And then we had someone else who said they have a cottonwood that you can have.
Perfect. Depends on how big it is. We like the smaller stuff, but yeah, reach out.
And then what does 2022 look like in terms of the beaver reintroduction projects?
Man, I'm just starting to think about it myself. So the season runs from May through October. That's when we can relocate beavers. We can do the coexistence stuff any time of the year. So we have a crew of 2 that start in May, and we will be doing 2 BDA projects. So we have one over in Douglas County again, and then we have another one up on Alder Creek, a Chihuahua tributary. And then as far as beaver reintroductions, we did a lot of surveys last year, and I need to go back and revisit those, but I know that there was interest in Stromberg as a potential. I'd like to get back up into Eagle Creek, which was already mentioned. And so just going back and checking in on some of these sites that we visited last year and making sure that they're good candidates still.
And then how fast can beavers swim to avoid their predators?
I don't know the answer to that. Fast. I will say when they're in the fish raceways, their water is probably thigh deep most of the time. And we have to get in with the beavers and use a box trap to kind of herd them into the trap. And that's how we release them, is in a box trap. And so I will say that just from my experience in that situation where they're confined, they are incredibly fast and can maneuver very well in water. And so I don't know the speed, which would be an interesting thing to look up. I'm going to have to do it now.
When you're relocating beavers, are you able to transfer them from different basins?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So we have a relocation permit through the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and per that, we can only relocate beavers within, I think it's a Huck 8, which is basically the river basin. So Wenatchee River Basin from the Columbia all the way up. We can get leeway on that, but we have to coordinate with the state veterinarian and the district wildlife biologist because of disease issues. So it is unknown whether beavers can be a carrier of aquatic diseases. There's, again, a lack of research on that. And so the reason that they limit within basins is because they're trying to limit the spread of disease. And there is research currently going on. That WSU grad student was actually looking at whether beavers are a carrier of aquatic diseases, and we helped in that research. So hopefully we'll know more in the coming years, and that could help guide whether we could move beavers like between the Wenatchee and Iniat, for example. But yeah, you can't move them across the Cascade Crest either. So yeah, it's mostly disease.
Okay, that makes sense. That looks like it wraps up most of our questions that we have. So I just just wanted to thank you again so much for your time and your passion, your enthusiasm for this work. It's been really interesting tonight to like just learn a little bit more about the environment that we have and like what people are doing to save it. I also wanted to thank the rest of our partners in this series, the Trout Unlimited and Cascade Fisheries and Cascadia Conservation District. It's really been a privilege to be able to lift up all of your voices and let you have a platform to talk about the amazing work that you are all doing. At the end of this, when you log out of this Zoom thing, there is a survey that should pop up. We would love for everyone to take that. It tells us a little bit more information about how we've connected with you and if you would like to hear of any of these things in the future. And then just a quick plug for some of our other programs that are upcoming within the library. Starting on April 13th at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays from then through May 25th, we are partnering with Confluence Health to provide a healthy living series, and we'll dive into topics like depression and cancer prevention and healthy approaches to weight loss and sleep. So you can find more information on that on our website at ncwlibraries.org. And other than that, I just want to say thank you again so much for your time this evening. And it's been a real pleasure and privilege working with you all.
Thanks, Ash.
Thank you. Like I said, this recording will hopefully be up on our YouTube in about a week if you know people who missed this fantastic opportunity.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.